The sound a $3,000 gown makes when it tears is not loud. That's what nobody tells you. It's a soft, wet whisper, like paper giving up, and it happens faster than your brain can catch it. 1 second, I was standing on the terrace of the Hollister estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. With a glass of champagne, someone had just knocked down the front of my dress. The next second, I was on my knees on cold marble, and Bitsy Ashford was laughing so hard she had to hold on to the railing, and Margaret, my husband's sister, my sister-in-law, the woman who had kissed my cheek an hour earlier, Margaret was looking down at me with her head tilted like I was a stain she'd have someone else clean up later. The silk had split from my hip to my knee. My thigh was out. The champagne was running down my stomach into the lining, pink and cold. And Vivian Carrington, whose foot I am almost certain was the foot, said, loud enough for the string quartet to hear over the music, "Oh, honey, Valentino doesn't really hold up on a figure like that, does it?" And the laughter. God, the laughter. 40 people in that ballroom, and I swear to you every one of them was laughing. Caroline Whitfield, who had spent 20 minutes at dinner asking me if my mother had ever been to Europe. Eleanor Pratt, who had told me that nursing was such a useful little career. A man I didn't know in a white dinner jacket who was laughing with his whole mouth open, and I remember thinking, very clearly, I hope you choke. Bitsy said, "Well, you can take the girl out of the trailer." And she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Everyone knew the rest. My name is Claire Whitaker. I grew up in a single-wide outside Asheville, North Carolina. My mother cleaned rooms at a Days Inn off E40 for 26 years. My father left when I was 9, and I have not heard his voice since. I put myself through nursing school working the breakfast shift at a diner called Peg's, and I still keep my old name tag, Claire W. R. N., in the top drawer of my dresser because some nights I need to touch it to remember I exist. 2 years ago, I married Daniel Hollister. You know the name. Everyone knows the name. Hollister Industries, $40 billion in assets, 4 generations of Boston money so old it creaks. I did not know the name when I met him. He was sitting in the cardiac waiting room at 2 a.m. drinking coffee out of a styrofoam cup. And his father was dying in the unit I worked, and he looked at me like I was the first real thing he'd seen in a week. He didn't tell me his last name for 23 days. By the time I found out, I was already in love with the man who brought me a sandwich on my break because I'd forgotten to eat. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I did not marry Daniel for the money. I have not spent the money. I still drive the Honda I had in nursing school. I still cut my own hair. Daniel laughs at me for it. Daniel loves me for it. Margaret has hated me for it from the first day. The invitation to the Hollister Foundation Spring Gala came in a cream envelope with my name calligraphed in gold. Daniel was in Zurich closing something I didn't understand. He texted me the morning of, "Wear the Valentino. I want to see you in it when I walk in. I love you. I'll be there by 9. I stood in front of our bedroom mirror for 40 minutes before I left. The gown was midnight blue, the color of the sky just before a storm breaks, and it had been Daniel's first real gift to me. I remember him watching me try it on at the boutique on Newbury Street, and the way his face got quiet, and how he'd said, "That's the one. That's how I see you." I almost didn't go. I want you to know that. I stood at the door of our apartment with my hand on the knob, and something in my chest said, "Don't," and I went anyway, because I had promised him, and because I was tired of being the girl who didn't go. I should have listened to my chest. Margaret met me at the door of the estate with a smile that didn't reach anywhere. She kissed the air beside my cheek and said, "Claire, darling, you came, and alone? How brave!" The emphasis on brave was a small knife. I smiled. I had smiled through a man dying in front of me on a Tuesday. I could smile through Margaret. "Daniel's flight was early," I said. "He'll be here by 9. "Oh, I'm sure he'll try," Margaret said. And she slid her arm through mine like we were friends, and she walked me into the ballroom. Her friends were waiting. I see that now. I didn't see it then. Vivian Carrington, in emerald green, who summered in Newport and looked at my gown the way a jeweler looks at a fake. Bitsy Ashford, whose husband owned half of a telecom company Daniel had once tried to buy, and who had been waiting 2 years to find something to say to me. Caroline Whitfield, with her horses and her third husband and her laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Eleanor Pratt, who was 80 years old and had not said a kind thing to another woman since 1962. They asked me where my family summered when I was a child. I told them we drove to Myrtle Beach once when I was 11, and I slept 3 to a bed with my cousins. They laughed like I'd told a joke. I hadn't. They asked me what my mother thought of the bracelet Daniel had given me. The Cartier, the one I was wearing. The one Daniel had put on my wrist on our first anniversary in the kitchen of our apartment while I was in sweatpants. I said my mother had never seen it. They asked why. I said my mother died 4 years ago. Eleanor Pratt said, "Oh, how convenient for you." I did not cry. I want that on the record. I did not cry once. They asked if I found the silverware confusing at dinner. They asked if I'd ever flown first class before I met Daniel. They asked if the apartment in Manhattan felt like a lot of house for someone who grew up how you grew up. Caroline said that last one. Caroline said it while holding my hand. And I answered every question. I answered them the way I answer patients' families at 3 a.m. when they're scared and mean and don't know they're being mean. I answered them quiet and steady and without flinching, because that is what my mother taught me to do when someone wanted you to break in front of them. Don't break in front of them, baby. Never break in front of them. Break in the car. Margaret said, "Let's all step out to the terrace. The light is divine at this hour." I followed because I didn't know what else to do. Daniel was not there yet. It was 8:40. My phone was in my clutch, silent. The terrace had 2 steps down onto the stone. I did not see the second step. I did not see Vivian's foot. I did not see Bitsy reaching for the hem of my gown as I stumbled, and I swear to you on my mother's grave, her fingers were in the fabric before I was even falling. And I heard the silk give, that soft, wet whisper, and my knees hit marble, and my champagne flute shattered, and the glass opened a cut above my ankle. That is 2 years later, still a scar. Nobody helped me up. That is the part I want you to sit with. Not the tear, not the laughter. Nobody helped me up. 40 people, a room full of jewels and degrees and charity board seats and named buildings, and not one of them put out a hand. Margaret looked down at me with her head tilted, and she said, and I will hear this in my bones until I die, she said, "Oh, Claire, you've made such a mess." Vivian said the thing about Valentino. Bitsy said the thing about the trailer. Somebody I didn't know said, "Does she even know how to stand up in heels?" And somebody else said, "Daniel must have been so lonely to settle for." And I didn't hear the end of that sentence because my ears were roaring. I got up by myself. I gathered the torn silk in my fist. I stood there in the middle of that terrace in a ruined gown with champagne soaking through to my skin and my knee bleeding. And 40 rich strangers laughing at me, and I thought very clearly, Margaret did this. Margaret planned this. The guest list, the terrace, the step, the foot, all of it. For 2 years she has been waiting, and tonight she finally got her hands on me. I thought about leaving. I thought about running to my car in a torn dress and driving home in my underwear and never coming back. I thought about my mother, dead 4 years, who had told me once that the rich don't fight you, Claire. They just wait you out, and you have to be the one who doesn't run. I didn't run. I stood there. I held the gown closed with my hand. I looked Margaret in the eye, and I did not speak, because my mother also taught me that silence in front of a cruel woman is a weapon sharper than anything you can say. And that was when the ballroom went quiet. Not the slow quiet of people noticing, the sudden quiet. The quiet of a room that has seen something behind you that you haven't seen yet. I turned around. The double doors at the end of the ballroom were open. Daniel was standing in them. He was still in his travel coat. He was still holding his briefcase. His tie was loose from the flight, and his face, I have been married to this man for 2 years, and I have seen him tender, and I have seen him tired, and I have seen him grieving his father. And I had never, ever seen his face look like that. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked. He walked the entire length of that ballroom in complete silence, and every single person in it watched him come. The The string quartet stopped playing. A waiter froze with a tray of flutes in his hand. Margaret's mouth opened and then closed again. Daniel stopped in front of me. He looked at my face, and then at the gown, and then at the blood on my ankle. He took off his coat. He put it around my shoulders. He pulled the lapels closed under my chin the way he does when we walk out of a restaurant in winter. He kissed my forehead. He said, against my hair, so only I could hear, "I'm here. I've got you. I'm so sorry I'm late." Then he turned to his sister. His voice, when it came, was not loud. That's what I want you to understand. Daniel does not do loud. Daniel does quiet, and quiet from Daniel is worse than any shouting I have ever heard in my life. He said, "Margaret." She said, "Danny, it was an accident." He said, "Margaret, don't." And she didn't. He said, "The foundation that paid for tonight is funded by a trust. I control the trust. The house you are standing in is owned by that trust. The allowance that has paid for that dress and those earrings and the car in your driveway and the tuition for your children and the house in Nantucket you don't think I know about. Every dollar of that comes out of an account that requires my signature every quarter. I have signed it every quarter for 14 years without reading it. I read it now." Margaret's face went the color of old paper. He said, "You had one job tonight. One. Be kind to my wife. That's it. That was the whole assignment." He paused. "You failed." He turned to the room. He did not raise his voice. He said, "Everyone in this ballroom who laughed tonight, and I watched you laugh, I saw every one of your faces from the door. You will not be invited back. Not to this house. Not to the foundation. Not to anything with my name on it. I will remember. I have a very long memory. Ask anyone who has ever done business with me." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then, and this is the part I am proudest of, not because of him, but because of me, I put my hand on Daniel's arm. I said, "Wait." I stepped forward. I was still holding my gown shut with one hand. My knee was still bleeding. I was still barefoot because somewhere in the fall I had lost a shoe. And I looked at Margaret, and I spoke for the first time all night at full volume. I said, "Margaret, I don't want the house taken. I don't want the allowance stopped. I don't want Daniel to punish you. I want something harder than that." I said, "I want you to say out loud in front of every person in this room what was so funny about a torn dress." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I waited. I waited a long time. I am a nurse. I am very good at waiting. She tried again. Her lips moved. No sound. Her eyes started to shine, and I realized, God help me. I realized with a kind of cold pity that Margaret Hollister, who had summered in places I couldn't pronounce, who had gone to schools older than my home state, who had looked down at me on a marble floor and called me a mess, Margaret Hollister had nothing to say, because there is no funny answer. There never was. There was only a woman who had decided, a long time before she ever met me, that she was better than any woman her brother could love. And standing in front of 40 people, she could not make that sentence come out of her mouth. I said very quietly, "That's what I thought." I took Daniel's hand. I said, "Let's go home." We walked out of that ballroom together. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. The last thing I heard was Eleanor Pratt, 80 years old, saying to no one in particular, "Well." In the car, Daniel didn't speak for a long time. He held my hand on the seat between us, and every few minutes he'd squeeze it, like he was checking I was still there. I finally listened to the voicemail. It was from the tarmac 40 minutes before everything. "Claire, my flight got in early. I'm driving straight to you. I love you. Save me a dance. I love you. I'll see you soon." I cried then. Not from the humiliation, not from the laughter. From that. From the 40 minutes of a man driving through traffic to get to a woman who was already falling, and from the fact that he made it. Even if he was late, he made it. He said, "I've known what she was for a long time. I kept hoping, I don't know what I was hoping, that marriage would soften her, that she'd see you the way I see you, that she'd grow up." He looked out the window. "I am so sorry, Claire. I am so sorry I made you walk into that house alone." I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about the gown, about all the nights I'd stood in front of the mirror in our apartment trying to practice being someone Margaret might accept, about the reading I'd done, the vocabulary I'd learned, the silverware I'd memorized. 2 years of trying to become a woman worthy of a ballroom. And then, in a ruined dress on marble, bleeding, I'd understood something I couldn't have understood any other way. The girl from the trailer and the woman in the Valentino were the same person. They had always been the same person. Margaret had seen it before I had. That was what she couldn't bear. Not that I didn't belong. That I did, and I hadn't noticed yet. And the day I noticed would be the day she lost the only game she knew how to play. She lost it tonight. I said it quietly to Daniel. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "My God, you're something." I said, "I know." We got home near midnight. I took off the gown and left it on the bathroom floor. I never wore it again. I never had it repaired. It's still in a box in the back of my closet, torn, stained, and I keep it the way I keep the name tag, because some things you keep not because they're beautiful, but because they're true. Daniel fell asleep on the couch in his travel clothes before I'd finished washing my face. When I came out, he'd pulled my old nursing name tag out of the drawer. It was sitting on the coffee table next to his hand. I don't know when he got it. I don't know why he wanted it near him that night. I didn't ask. I covered him with a blanket. I sat on the floor next to him and I watched him breathe for a while. And I'll tell you what I know now, 2 years later, that I didn't know then. They ripped my gown laughing. They thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me. They thought they'd put me back in my place, shown me the door, reminded me who I really was. They did remind me who I really was. It was the best thing that ever happened to me.